I had to be okay with showing up the way that I am, because that's actually where I think my power has always been as a public speaker, and I've been trying to either dilute it or show up in a larger than life way that just isn't me. And so being able to lean into the public speaker that I actually am has been really awesome. Like, you should have seen my first couple of outfits as a keynote speaker. Um, Boring, so boring. When you think about the experience of, or the phrase "calladita te ves más bonita," it's different. We have an idea of what the overall theme is, but it quite literally plays out very differently for every single person. And holding on to that difference, I think, is so important and crucial, because that's actually what keeps us being able to be like, okay, let's explore it. Let's continue to explore it, because it permeates every single part of who we are and what we do. And I really want to explore my passions and my love for public speaking, and continue to create a community around it, and just like have that be my thing, because this brings me joy. And not only does it bring me joy, but it also checks the box of, it's also doing something for someone else in a way that I can control.
Sabrosura
Hello, everyone. This is Pam, the Café con Pam, the bilingual podcast that features Latine and people of the global majority who break barriers, change lives, and make the world a better place. Welcome to episode 362 of Café con Pam. Today, we are having a conversation with Yvonne. Yvonne is a public speaker and founder of Chats with Yvonne, a consulting firm that provides public speaking training to individuals, corporate teams, and community organizations. Her public speaking practice is rooted in creating accessible, culturally affirming, and introvert friendly environments that help people practice and improve their public speaking. She's also the founder of Latina Presente, a community providing a monthly programming for Latinas and introverts to practice public speaking con cultura. Her speaking career began as keynote speaker for education based conferences, later receiving her BA in Media and Native American Studies from UC Berkeley and an MBA from SJSU. Before going full time in her public speaking practice, she had a career in tech for 7 years in experiential marketing, internal communications, social impact, and community management. Leveraging her communications and public speaking expertise for over 10 years, she shares her knowledge in public speaking from her perspective as an introverted first gen Latina. Listeners, this conversation with Yvonne, first of all, we went over time because we talked about so much. I think Yvonne is one of those people that we can get, I can get very philosophical with, because we share a lot of those similar thoughts on various things. I mean, it's a little bit different because we explored so many topics, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm not going to elongate this intro anymore. Sin más, here's my conversation with Yvonne. Yvonne, welcome to Café con Pam.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. So, the first question that I always ask is, what is your heritage?
I am Mexican American, born and raised in San Francisco, California. My mom is from Guanajuato, Mexico, and my dad was born in La Ciudad de Mexico.
Oh, really? You're
Yeah.
half Chilanga?
Yeah, yeah. I didn't necessarily grow up with that side of the family, but I went maybe like, how many years ago was it? No sé, un diciembre se me pegó. I was like, I wanna go to La Basilica during December, and I was gonna go by myself, and I was like, "Why would no, let's reconnect with your family over there." So I met my grandma, my grandpa, my side of the family over there, and, I was like, "Oh, yeah, de aquí soy." Like, this
See?
is this is what I've been. I look like them. It's so weird how genetics work. I know genetics work the way they do, but it's so crazy.
So, you grew up with mom,
I did grow up with mom, yes.
and dad is just not in the picture?
No, no. He I have a younger brother who is we're about 2.5 years apart. So when he was born, dad went and did his thing, and it was my mom, brother, and I forever. Dad came in the picture every once in a while,
Yeah,
but
I have one of those.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. I often I'm like, "Yeah, because I didn't have a dad," to certain things, and people are like, "But you do. You also talk about your dad." And I'm like, "Yeah, but an absent dad is not a dad, you
No,
know?
it's not. So he's more of like
A donor. He was there."
it's a weird thing to talk about it with folks that haven't necessarily experienced it, because even today now, right, some people will be like, "Well, Yvonne, it doesn't do you any good to, like, not forgive him and all this stuff." I'm like, "No, no, like, I'm good, though. Like, I have 0 feelings about it now." Like, when you sit down and think about it, a veces sí, como que dices, "Oh, pobrecita de mí," right? But day to day, I'm like, No, it's fine. Like, it's just another person out in the world."
Right, for sure. With me, my dad I do have a relationship with my dad. I went actually back to live with him when I was 15.
Wow.
And so that was like the healing process where a lot of things happened. And so I do have a relationship with him, but it's not, and my best friend, for example, she's like, "Yeah, when my dad taught me how to change the oil in my car." And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but cool.
Yeah. Cries and daddy issues, just kidding.
Right. Right. Cries and daddy issues. So you grew up in NorCal. How did your mom make it to like how from Guanajuato? Like why Northern California?
So, my mom is the youngest of 7, and I think I don't wanna say naturally, but almost organically, when you're the youngest, you probably have a little bit of a rebel, more of a rebel inside of you than your older, more traditional following siblings do, and so I think she's always had that, and I remember her telling me that she'd get postcards from relatives that were here from San Francisco, and she would always see the Golden Gate Bridge, and she's like, "One day I'm gonna live there, one day I'm gonna live there." She has 2 older brothers that are maybe 4 years older, and they had told my grandma, "Oh, yeah, nos vamos a venir para Mexico, I mean, para the US, we're gonna go over there, we're gonna do it," and my mom wanted to go with them. She was 15 at the time, and naturally, my grandma was like, "No, you're not going." And my mom was like, "Yes, yes, I am." Obviously not that simple, but she ended up coming to the United States with her, 2 brothers
At 15?
at 15, yeah, yeah. I think for about a year or 2, maybe a year, she enrolled in high school in San Francisco at Mission High, and which is normally where most folks would attend school, and, porque allí tenían programas de español and English, so she attended school there, but she was only there for, like, about a year maybe or 2 from what I recall, because she was like, "Yeah, I wanna work." So, yeah, so she came here when she was 15, and she stayed in San Francisco, like, that was her home for up until now. Well, now in East Bay, but San Francisco.
Still NorCal.
Mhm.
But it's, like, so fascinating how, like, back th I mean, she was 50 she was a child, and
Yeah.
she went to work, and I wonder about how laws were so different in so many aspects, like
Yeah, like, how did you do that? How were you able to do that? Like, I always think and now you could never get away with that, and I also think from my grandma's perspective, even as an older sister, right? I have a sister who is 18, and I still see her as a baby, as a little child,
yeah.
and I'm like, "I could not imagine you just picking up and leaving," and not only maybe I'd be a little bit more okay with it because I'm like, "Oh, pues she has the language. If anything, I could go over there and, stay with her for a couple weeks if she needs me to help her settle in." Like, it's a different kind of, situation, but I would still feel very uncomfortable with it. Like,
For
"Are you
sure.
sure about that? I don't think you should do that
I
until you're
know.
30." I'm just kidding.
Totally. No, mi mamá también platica que how I don't know, there was something back then. She lied about her age también
Mm.
to start working, and so now that she is working on her retirement, like, nothing matches, People are like, "Wait, you're supposed to be older, but are you younger?" Like, there's all of this stuff because people could just do whatever.
Yeah, and no one really cared that much. No one was
Right.
really on you about that.
Yeah, they needed labor, let's go.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So and then my mom had me when she was 19 going on 20. So then I was born and raised in San Francisco.
So you're an eldest daughter.
I am, yeah. I have, those 2 siblings, so how old am I? My brother is 25, 26, and my sister is 18. And then on my dad's side, he has 3 children, so I have siblings on that side too.
Do you see them?
No, not really, actually. I there were moments in time, when dad would show up and it's like, "Oh, okay, let's,
Here they are.
hang out." Yeah, and I'm like, "Oh, I have a brother." I think maybe he's, like, 18, 21, or in his 20s, early 20s. Pero no conviví mucho con ellos. The other 2 are younger girls, and so that at that point, I was, like, older and just
Mhm.
doing my own thing, that I didn't have to go over to the house and hang
Totally,
out.
totally. So how was it for you to grow up as an eldest daughter? La responsabilidad. Did you ever hear like, tú eres el ejemplo?
It's so interesting because growing up, I had the responsibilities, right? Because my mom worked, she started working at a hotel as a janitor at one point. So she had night shifts. And then in the mornings, she would want to sleep in. So I would take care of my little sister. I remember my little sister was like almost a newborn.
Oh
And
my
I'm over
god.
here like getting up. I mean, I will never take away from the experience of motherhood, but I'm like, for a brief period of time, I feel like I experienced just a little bit of it, just a little bit, just the waking up, getting the bottle, 3 AM, and
How old were
then
you?
well, my sister and I are 10 years apart, so I was like 10, 11,
Whoa.
and then I would wake up early and go to school, right? And I was like, now thinking back, I'm like, "How did I do that stuff?" Like, I shouldn't have been doing all that, but I also know my mom didn't have any other support, right? So we're there and it's fine, right? But my mom was never the type to be like, "Oh, tú tienes que ser el ejemplo para tus your siblings." I almost took that on my own because I
Mm,
saw I don't know, I was just like, "Oh, well, no one else is really going to do it. I have to do it." Uh, I would dress my brother. I would find my siblings knew, "Hey, if I need something, let me go ask Yvonne and see where my shoe is. I can't find my sock, déjale pregunto a Yvonne." And I think sometimes I wonder if it's part of the reason why today I'm, like, more hesitant to have kids. I'm like, "I don't know if I want any," you know? So, like, gosh, they're hard.
they are hard.
Like, I had to be a little bit more of an adult than I would have wanted to. I think about my little sister, and I use her as an example a lot because I think that the way that she grew up is the way that I would envision more children to be able to grow up. I'm not saying she has her own lived experience, and I'm sure she has her own set of, "Damn, I wish I didn't this happened," or whatever, but
Mhm.
I think sometimes I often think I really was 10, 11, 12 years old acting like I was, like, an adult, and that is always really strange to think about and look back on.
For sure. And how that shapes you.
100%.
Like, I wonder if that's where the responsibility was kinda, like, self-imposed when mom was sleeping and you were like, "Well, I'm it."
Yeah, yeah, 100%, and I think it follows you. It follows you forever, and it's something you can't quite let go. I feel so inclined to take care of people, but at the same time, I'm trying to unlearn it. So it's like 2 different Yvonnes going at it all the time, where it's like,
Yeah.
"No, chill out. You don't need to do that. You don't need to do that." And like, "No, but I kind of feel like I should. I want to. It feels weird not to." So
Yeah.
it's a constant battle between the Yvonnes.
Totally, and I love that you mentioned, like, the multiple parts of you because the work that I do is in
Mhm.
our niñas, because we have multiple in our niñas. So if we were to go to your 11-year-old taking care of a baby, what would she need?
Support. Like, I think, just someone to do it. Someone else to actually
Mm,
do that stuff so she could go and draw. So she could be like, "Ooh, is she gonna be a really cool artist?" Like, sometimes I think, are there things that I didn't invest a lot of time in or wasn't able to explore my interests because I just didn't quite literally didn't have the time to do it? And I do think though that it's part of the reason why today if I have an interest in something, I'm like, "Let me just go try it. Let me see
yeah,
what," even if I am not great at it, I wanna try it, I wanna give it a chance. So I constantly feel like I'm making up time, but I think support and someone else to just do it would have been nice. And I don't think that it should have been my mom, if I'm
mm,
being honest, right? I think my mom was doing what she needed to do and what she could do, and so I don't think it's my mom who I expected or who I would go back and expect to do it. It's just everyone else, right? But she again, she was here by herself, and so
Tu abuela never came?
no, she couldn't. Um, and my mom was undocumented for a majority of my life up until I was, like, 17, I think. Um, and so it was literally just us, right? There
Yeah.
was nobody else.
Y sus hermanos, pero some of her siblings are here.
Sí, bueno, ya no. At the time, there was, one of my aunts, she was living here in the States, but they were kind of disconnected to some capacity, I think, again, my mom was kind of o sea, tuvo hijos, nunca se casó, she came here when she was 15.
Sí, sí, sí. La rebelde, la rebelde.
Sí, sí, o sea, my brother and I have the same dad, but then my little sister has a different dad, and the rest of my aunts have been married with their husbands for, like, 10,000 years and have, like, 20 kids.
Right, right, right. Sí. Entonces, probablemente como que she didn't fit in to the traditional role.
Yeah, yeah, and I do think, though, that's been one of the in my journey, I always say that I think that's unique in the way that I grew up because, yes, when you put the label of older sister, in a Mexican household, a lot of people assume, "Oh, you had to do this, you had to," which is, yes, I had to do a lot of things, but it didn't necessarily come from traditional roles. It came from it's just like, just my mom and I, so, like, we have to make it work. But even then, right, you do see little things like, "Oh, why do I have to wash the dishes and do this and do that, and all my brother has to do is take out the trash," right? Those kinds of things. I think I almost rebelled because I was like, "I'm not gonna learn how to cook because you just want me to cook because 'cause I'm a girl," right? And
Right.
now I'm like, "Shoot, I should have probably learned how to cook." Um, but yeah, like, there were a lot of my mom has never been super religious, right? I think she expresses her religion in a very different way where it's like, "Oh, okay, soy católica," right? Because that's how I grew up and I believe in this and that, but I'm not we had moments in time where we would go to church every Sunday and then other times where I think she was probably just exhausted, right? And didn't want to go to church. And I remember growing up and being like, why do we get all dressed up? And then everybody there just seems to kind of like not, everyone's just staring at each other. They're not even paying attention to the word of the Lord, right? Um, so my mom has never really been super traditional in that sense. And I think it's helped liberate me in a lot of ways too, where I I think she's been able to, "Okay, ya estamos bien, like, we're okay," right? Like, "Go do your thing." I've never felt held back as far as, "No, o sea, ¿qué va a decir la gente?" Because al contrario, I feel like in our relationship, in my mom and I's relationship, she's very much the, like, "I don't care, like,
Mm,
who cares?" Right? And I'm like, "No, mami, pero ¿qué? ¿Qué va a decir la gente?" Right? And I think it probably comes from me being so, like, wanting to just take care and, I don't know. So I learn a lot about my mom, about how I want to exist within the world because I've always thought she's been really bold in her expression, which isn't
mhm.
something that necessarily comes naturally to me all the time. Um, so I appreciate growing up in a way that wasn't as traditional.
For sure. That's really awesome. And to hear a different perspective, because typically it's the calladita te ves más bonita. And so growing with someone who wasn't
Yeah,
and
yeah,
hearing that story is really cool.
yeah. And I think where I heard it was from my tias, was from everyone else
Mm,
outside, and I think where my perspective with it comes in or, like, my lived experience with it is almost being like, "Should I be a little bit more like that?" Because I see the resistance that my mom gets all the time from everybody else, and, like, do I want that, right? And so it almost became this internalized of, "Oh, yeah, pues mis tías, like, they're judging," like, and it's if everybody is judging, I'm like, "Is there some truth to it?" Right? So as a little girl, you don't know, right? And so I remember I'm like, "Okay, maybe I should be a little bit," and I'm naturally more reserved anyway, so I remember thinking like, "Okay, this is this is causing so much friction for my mom and her experience. What would it be like if I did what they
go the
were
opposite.
saying?" See,
Yes.
exactly. And then, you realize, no, o sea, no, then yeah. Yeah, tenemos que ser como somos, right?
Totalmente, 100%. I resonate with that because in my case, it was my dad because he's a brujo. He ever since I was little, you know, absent father, but when he was there, he was always talking about metaphysica, and I learned about Reiki, for example, when I was like 10, 11. And he's a Reiki master. He uses all like he's a shaman, like all the things. And he was judged all the time with
Mm,
mi abuela, que era súper católica. Entonces she was like, no, like, a mí me tiró like a deck of tarot cards, like, you know? And so, igualito, I was like, well, I'm just going to go far away from that space because, he's shamed for it.
mhm.
Yeah, ahora, pues, it's so funny because I do pretty much what he does.
Yeah, I
It's
was gonna
really
say
annoying.
that. That's hilarious.
But eventually, all that to say, we come back to it.
Yeah, we do, and I think it's important to go through the process because we don't always the other day I was talking to someone and they brought up the term, like, first gen, right? And how they were like, "I don't even know if I wanna use it because, like, what does it mean? Has the meaning of it been diluted?" Right? When you think about the experience of or the phrase calladita te ves más bonita, it's different. We have an idea of what the overall theme is, but it quite literally plays out very differently for every single person. And
Yes.
holding on to that difference, I think, is so important and crucial because that's actually what keeps us being able to be like, okay, let's explore it. Let's continue to explore it because it permeates every single part of who we are and what we do.
100%. And that's why precisely, so I created the principles of Gaeta culture. So
Mhm,
there's 5 principles because not everyone has the same experience. And so for some people, it might be like lose your voice. You don't have a voice. Be quiet. That's one premise. That's the most known one. Another principle is like stand in the role. So you take on the role of the caregiver, of the whatever, and then you kind of like box yourself into those roles. That's different from losing your voice.
mm.
It's still under the umbrella of calladita. And so totally everyone has a different experience. And so to bring it back to the first gen, I mean, it's almost like the definition of Latina, right? Like that's another one that's like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I go back and forth all the time, right? Um, when I first started my public speaking journey, o sea, in any case, I've never been like, "Oh, I'm a Latina reader, I'm a Latina
Right.
writer," right? Because I'm like, it just I just am, right? Like, I just am, and it's so part of who I am that it just shows up. Like, I don't need to tell you because it shows up.
Yep.
And for a really long time, I was like, "Well, do I have to lead? Like, do I have to say, oh, I'm a Latina public speaker, right? Like, why can't I just be a damn good public speaker generally, right?
Yes.
Like, point blank." And I remember when I was in college, I had this Native American professor, and we were reading indigenous literature. And that was one of the things that the author mentioned was like, the themes that I write about and the things that I talk about are, yes, from my lens and my cultural lens, but these are universal human experiences, right? And so I don't want to be a great Native American indigenous writer. I just want to be a great writer
Mhm.
because then it continues to further divide the like, oh, what is the foundation for good writer, right? And we continue to perpetuate that. And so I always go back and forth with it, which is why sometimes too, even first gen, right? Like there's a couple different definitions of it. I'm like, do I even fit into that? Like what,
Right.
right? So it's like but at the same time, I understand like maybe some folks need to make sense of it all, right? And it
Yes.
helps us, and that's almost like the tipping point where it's like, oh, okay, now I understand it. Wait a minute, let me ask some more questions about it. Um, and then you get into the whole marketing of it, right? Where it's like, how do people
Right.
find you? They're probably going to look up Latina writer, right? And so if it's not in your,
SEO.
it
Yeah.
doesn't show up, which is like, oh gosh, right? Like, damn, we can't win.
We can't totally, and it's one of those things that it's a constant battle, I think, especially for people of the global majority because the dominant culture is like the good writer, and so it's the good speaker, the good whatever. And so we almost have to create that differentiator. And so it's like almost looking at it from different lenses. From the lens of marketing, you have to further identify yourself. From the lens of like philosophy or sociology, even like, is that necessary? Is that creating more division in the world? From the lens, like, there's so many.
Yeah, like reclaiming and being like, "No, for so long you weren't able to," or like, "You were," it's so complex that and
So
I
complex.
I am the type of person that quite literally on a random day, I'll sit there and just think about it, and I'm like, "Damn, like, this is crazy,"
What do
like
I do next? Yeah. Totally. I know. It's one of those journeys, I think, especially in the US. I think it's a very US also experience. Lately, I have been talking about the US experience because I grew up in Mexico City y en la Ciudad de México yo era Pam. O sea, yo no tenía que explicarte if I was the first in my family to do whatever, if I was like Latina or if I was bilingual or not. Like all of that came secondary to my humanity, which
Mhm,
of course there's like so many other elements and layers that go from that. Pero no necesitaba tantos labels.
mhm.
Y aquí it's almost like, I mean, and I've said this since I first got here. When you make it to this country, the US is the box checker. So immediately, the moment you arrive, like literally, you cross the border, they give you a form, and you have to check some boxes. Where do you belong? Are you like gender, starting from gender, from citizenship status, like box checking all the time. And I think that's also a systemic way to control.
100%. I mean, like, to your point, because my mom grew up undocumented for majority of my life, me mandaba a Mexico. And, sometimes I think, "Oh, to give me a break." Yeah, yo iba por ella, me mandaba con su, cámara digital, couple little pesos
Wow.
to take pictures and send money to everybody there, but I started going to Mexico when I was 6 every summer, and I grew up with my cousins, right? Obviously not really because there were months, chunks of time where I wasn't there, but every summer we would get to know each other, and to them, I just had one label, and that was gringa, right? I was like and I'm like, "Wow, okay, cool," right? And it was just that, and I remember feeling like, "Dang, you're right." When I went back home, there were all these more so it felt like things that I because of the labels, right, that I had to fulfill. I remember even when I would do the low and reduced lunch at school, it's like low income. I didn't know what that meant, but I came into consciousness around it once I started actually seeing it on paper, right? And so that experience in and of itself probably could be dissected further. It's like
It becomes part of your identity.
yeah, I was like, I was just living my life. You see, a veces I look back and I'm like, damn, we really didn't have money, right? Like I really didn't have food at the house, right? But
Yeah.
I didn't I didn't experience it in like quote unquote low income.
Yeah.
I think when you see that term, you everybody makes all of these ideas and themes around what it means to be low
Mhm.
income and to actually experience it is a completely different thing, right? But and I'm not saying that it wasn't, that it was amazing, right? But I'm saying I didn't come into consciousness around really what it really meant.
Like the suffering of it.
Yeah, when I like started making my own money and when I started to I knew I had always seen it on paper and I was like, "Okay, when we put low income, that, qualifies us for, free reduced lunch," right? So I get lunch all the time, and, by the way, no one at my school had like, I don't think anybody in my school paid. There was probably, like, one person in my school that, paid, I think, $1 every day for lunch, but yeah, you come into when you have these labels, you come to this consciousness around what they actually mean and whether you it's almost this like, do I fulfill it? Am I fulfilling it because it is a part of my identity and it's part of what I my lived experience? Or am I fulfilling it because I saw it and now I'm that's like I'm centered, I'm rooted in that
Yes.
identity, in that label.
Oh my gosh. So much. We could totally dissect that in so many ways.
I'm telling you, I talk about this with my friends. I'm like, "Dude, this is so crazy." And then I go on my I'm like Hashtag Latina speaker.
Right. Same. Same. I'm always like rebelling against the box, but you have to check it,
Yeah.
you know? I know. It's like it's such a thing. And it made me think of even what we're experiencing in the world. I go on social media and there's also like people want to check the box of activism and the expectation that your activism like has to look a certain way and there's and I así como tú te sientas a pensar, I do the same thing. And recently it was this like I you're scrolling and then I came across this account of this person saying like we don't need to coddle you, or like if you just came into the program and like you're now supporting and you're with it, you learned about it, whatever, you just get with it. And so and I'm like, oh, this is fascinating because like even from the lens of liberation you still want to check a box,
Mm,
you know.
mm. That one right there. That. Because we're so I think we're so used to it. It's
Yes,
become such a part of our existence, especially here within the in the US, that we almost can't imagine a world without it,
totally.
like and then it's constant battle because we don't often feel at 100%. I don't think we'll ever feel 100% identified with the labels that we've created, so we continue to create
More.
even more things, and then we're like, "But that one doesn't feel 100%," and so we're trapped in this wanting to create labels for it instead of simply existing, right? And showing up and be like, "Oh, this is how I show up. This is my experience, and, you know, it is what it is."
Yeah, and accept it and like you don't have to like scrutinize it and double check that I'm actually checking the boxes how you're expecting me to.
Yeah, yeah. And I totally understand, right? We could talk about this for days, right? Where it's like, oh, on the flip side, it's like, well,
Right?
we need to have this represent if we don't have everybody else does the label, right? Like they do the labels, and if they're represented in that and we decide not to check the labels and we're not represented in that, then they're gonna think we just don't exist.
Right.
Right? It's this constant push and pull. I'm like,
I
oh
know.
my God, it's exhausting.
It is exhausting. But let's get back to your story because we could literally sit here all day talking about the philosophy of and sociology of it.
See.
Okay, so well, let's take a quick coffee break.
Sabrosura pa' ti que.
Yvonne, do you drink coffee?
I do. I'm drinking coffee right now.
Yes. Tell me, how do you drink your coffee? Are you I brew it at home or you go get your cafecito?
I brew it at home. My morning cafecito is always brewed at home. It needs to be. It just is something, I go down in my messy bun in my robe, go make my coffee, take the first sip of coffee outside. Pero ya después en la tarde, I go out if I need to. If I feel like I can't concentrate at home, I'll go out, and for some reason, I always feel like I need to buy something wherever I end up. I can't just sit there. I have to buy something or they'll kick me out. So, me compro uno en la tarde.
Do you have a limit? Like, how late can you drink coffee? Or are you one of those, like, you can drink coffee at any time?
Quién sabe next year, but hasta ahorita estoy bien. I can drink a coffee late. I can't
Nice.
I will say I can't drink like, an espresso-based coffee after maybe like 6 or something.
Okay.
Pero cafecito normal, así drip coffee, I could drink that and still knock out. It actually makes me kinda sleepy.
What? I'm so jealous of people like you. My limit is like 2 p.m. That's very much pushing it. The other day I had one at 3 and I was like probably up for 3 days.
Oh, ¿y te lo haces en la casa or do you go buy it?
Yo me lo hago en la casa igual. In the morning I make my morning coffee. I so when I'm in right now I'm in Denver and I have like a little tiny baby like 2 cup drip because David doesn't drink coffee, which is like he's never drank coffee. His family doesn't drink coffee. It's wild to me.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so funny. Opposites attract, right? So I have a baby tiny drip coffee maker just for the ease of it. At home in San Diego, because I live in a multi generational household, we have a much bigger drip structure, and that's like my daily. If I want to get fancy, I either use a greca, like the greca, like the ¿cómo le llaman en inglés? The mocha, like it's the
Oh,
gray
okay.
thing,
Mhm, mhm.
or I make myself a pour over.
Oh, pour over is so good. Yeah. I have, like, all these coffee gadgets. My friends recently I left I left my corporate job in December, and they came together and got me an espresso machine. So I, like,
Nice.
feel real official. I'm practicing my latte art, so one day I can
Ooh.
have, like, cool latte art. I'm not gonna make it like a business or anything, it's just to know just to
Know how
know
to
how to
make
make
it?
it, like,
I know.
come over, I can make you a nice cup of coffee.
I used to be a barista. When I first left my corporate job, I went to make coffee, and I would never like making latte art takes a lot of patience, and I know how to do it, but I was always tell my clients like, "I'm not gonna make you a flower," and they'd be like, "It's fine, just
Like,
like
it's gonna be what it is, okay?
yeah,
Whatever it comes out
it's
as,
gonna be
that's
a
what you're
blob,
having.
and you're gonna drink it,
Yeah.
and it's gonna be just as good."
So my mom used to one of her jobs that she had early on, after the or before the hotel, no me acuerdo, but she worked with these 2 ladies that owned a little coffee cart unit,
Wow.
and she was a barista, she learned how to make her lattes and stuff, and then, le dijeron: "Oye, ¿te quieres quedar con el carrito?" But she couldn't because, she was undocumented at the time, but she's
No!
always had this dream of opening up a coffee shop. I was like, "Maybe I could work for you." Like, we'll figure out how to make your little mobile unit, and then
For sure.
yo te ayudo a hacer los cafés también.
Mi mamá también quiere hacer eso, así que las podemos juntar.
Oh my gosh, let's do it.
She talks about it all the time. It's so funny. I don't know what's the thing about coffee carts and moms. I don't know. That's another thing to explore. Well, let's get back to the show because we're running out of time. We're gonna speed it up. So you grew up in NorCal. You went into corporate tech, to be
Yes.
specific. Why tech?
Growing up in San Francisco, I think talked about labels, right? But low income. I mean, I was everywhere on the Muni, if you're familiar with our bus system, but I was everywhere on the Muni with my friends, with my mom. That's kind of how we got around the city. And as a little girl, I would just look up at the buildings downtown and be like, "Ooh, one day I wanna work there." I had no idea what they did there, didn't know what type of business was going on there, but I just knew I would like to work there one day just because it's cool, right? I think the access to it, all of that, just the high rise, I don't know, just a dream that I had. I went off to college and I was interviewing for jobs. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I need to get a job right now." And Uber, who I think they had offices or have offices in San Francisco. Uber at the time was like, "Oh," they were hiring for a fellowship. And I did my interview over the phone and they accepted me and I was like, "Okay, cool. So I'm going to join this." And prior to that, I thought I would be some kind of psychologist, a social worker, something like that, but I get very emotionally invested, and I was like, "Dude, I'm about to adopt every single kid that needs
Right.
me. I'm about to like, I will not know how to separate the 2." And I started getting into marketing, and I couldn't be a business major anymore because I decided too late. So I was like, "Oh, let me look into marketing," and I just thought it was fun, and the opening that they had at Uber was doing this, and it was a fellowship where you got to learn a little bit about every single part of the business. So I accepted it, I got it. I was there as a fellowship for like 8 months, and then there was a job opening. I was like, "No, I don't really wanna take it." So then I went to an advertising agency and started doing events, experiential marketing. Was there for like 2 years, and I went back to tech, and I think if I'm being really honest, right, I've always tried to follow what my passions are. I think because I've never known. I'm like, "Am I really good at this or am I just good at it because I've done it for so long already?" So
Mm.
I wanna continue to expand my understanding of the art that I do, right? In my case, it's communications, and, so I started exploring it a lot more, and at the advertising agency, events is like a 24/7 job. So I was like, "I need a break from this." It was not a great time.
Especially as an introvert.
Yeah, no, it was tough. I mean, I loved it. It was just if you have an event it was events all the time, and so, that was probably and I didn't have at the time, I didn't really have great managers, like, it's in I still go back to the agency because they're like family, but the people that I had there at the time were not great, and that was a moment in my life where I experienced like real I could really call this anxiety type of thing where I'm
Mm.
like, "Oh my gosh, I'm shaking when I come into work," all of that.
Oof.
So I was like, "It's time for me to, like, go somewhere else." Got back into tech again on internal communications, and, I think with tech, it's the stability that it provides you financially that really drew me to it because of it, right? I could use my skill set around community building and communications and event planning in a way where it wasn't just me doing all of the work. It was kind of a shared responsibility. And after that marketing agency, I kind of wanted that. I was like, I don't want to feel like I have to do it all. I want support, right? I want support.
It's your little niña asking for it.
Right? Yeah, yeah, I was like, "I want support and I want stability." I think the tech industry has always provided me that. When I started working at Uber, even, my last job was also in San Francisco. I would invite my mom to come over for lunch because they provide lunch, right? Oh, my little sister wanted snacks. She'd really like the seaweed thing, so I would bring a whole bunch of those for her, right? And so it was just this you get comfortable in the access to things that you didn't necessarily have before. And I felt really stable in my career in tech. I learned stability. I learned like stability in self, both in my career, but also financial stability. I traveled alone for the first time because of it. I was able to more financially support. And I don't mean that my mom expected me to support. I mean like, oh ma, aquí te compré esto. Or oh ma, te voy a comprar tu vuelo. Like, oh, come here, I'll buy your flight, right? And so it was something that I hadn't experienced, and tech allowed me to do that to one extent or the other, and at the same time build my speaker career, right? Because I was being booked to speak at different conferences throughout my time in tech, and they were so lenient about it. They were so okay with it. And I think in other industries, you have to be like, oh, do I have to take PTO, right? Like, it just tech really, what is it? What's the word?
Like flexible?
Yeah, it was just very flexible. They just babied.
Mm.
I mean, there's tech has its own thing, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. But um, yeah, so that was a long kind of answer to that, but that's kind of how I landed in there. I was like a little girl that had this dream of working at a tall building, and the tall buildings just happened to be tech.
And why did you decide to leave? Was tech your last job?
Yeah, I was working from home.
Were you in San Diego yet?
See,
Okay.
I was working from home for the past like 3 years, I think, really. And so the company was great, right? Like the company that I was at was great. People tell me all the time, like, why did you leave? Right? They would take us on trips every quarter and like all the fancy stuff, right? But I just felt like I needed to be doing more. It felt like, oh, okay, I am at a place where I feel stable in a lot of different aspects of my life. What happens now? I think for a really long time, I was chasing that stability, and I felt like my career is what gives me that. And when I started chats with Yvonne, I was wanting to just create a community, right? Share experiences and information. And along my speaking stuff, I remember texting my English teacher because she was there in the audience for my very first keynote that I got paid for. And I was like, Abby, can people do this full time? Like, this is a lot of money. Like, do people do this as a job? She's like, yeah, they do. I was like, huh, cool, okay. But I continued on in my career for 7 years, and now recently I was like, why do I have to? I don't have to be doing that, right? I could always go back to tech if I really felt called to do it, but I felt called to do more, right? And whether we like to accept it or not, there's only so much that you can actually do to impact the world when you're in
Mhm.
tech. Yes, representation matters, but to what extent, right?
Mm.
I was like, in my day to day, you do become very engulfed in tech. If you've been in tech, you know that it's like all the jargon, and it doesn't mean anything, right? Like DEI, like it just doesn't mean anything. Um, it doesn't mean anything not because you don't care about it. It doesn't mean anything because you're capped to how much impact you can actually make. And so I said to myself, I'm a little burnt out. I've been working since I was like 16. I don't
Mhm.
I have the ability to move on and go to something else and be okay. And I really want to explore my passions and my love for public speaking and continue to create a community around it and just like have that be my thing because this brings me joy and not only does it bring me joy, but it also checks the box of it's
Mhm.
also doing something for someone else in a way that I can control, right? And not only that I can control, but that I can co-create with people where it's like, oh, I'm not I can lead it, but if there is something that can change, it quite literally does not need an approval. It can just change. Like it can just be. And I think that's beautiful. And I wanted to give myself the time to kind of just explore that and say, pues sabes que ahorita no tengo hijos, estoy bien financially. Um, if I at any point need to go back to a job or want to, because the mental like lack of structure is something completely different, but I'm like,
Yeah.
maybe I want a part-time job somewhere just to give myself structure, but I thought, quiero dejarlo y I want to explore real impact.
So to backtrack a little, did you leave with a plan? So did you have an exit plan-ish? Savings, because I wanna make sure people are not, like, just like, "I'm gonna put my 2 weeks notice."
No, 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 no. I am If we're gonna talk about the labels, right? I'm a first gen, oldest daughter of 3. There's no way that my, trauma will allow me to leave something
Just like
without having
that.
a plan. Yeah, there is no way. I leave room to go with the flow. I always say this, I'm like, "I leave room to go with the flow, but I need to know what the flow is, like, what's happening in the flow," right?
Which way the current is going.
Yeah, no, no, no. I had savings. I have an income coming in as well from my public speaking consulting and public speaking engagements. So I didn't just decide to leave. Matter of fact, I wouldn't have left if I thought, oh, I don't have an additional stream of income. Because that's really important. Like I don't care what anybody says. Like I
Mm.
can't just Yvonne, I can't just be like, I'm gonna go follow my dreams and no. Um, that is not me. And so I was like, no, I have sort of a plan, right? And I have something coming in. And I knew that while I was working my job, there were things in my public speaking consulting business that I had to turn down or speaking engagements that I had to turn down because I was working and I had that commitment.
Mm.
So I said to myself, what would it look like if I was able to just do this full time and explore it? And I owe it to myself to not be so caught up on the no, Yvonne, tienes un trabajo bueno, you did this. Like I owe it to myself to just like challenge myself to leap into that. But still, again, have a little bit of a plan.
You for sure. I did the opposite, and so I don't at all recommend. Like, I didn't have any guidance, and so now that's why when I ask people, I'm like, "Wait, let's rewind it and let people know that it's not," because to bring it back to the stability that you talk about, stability is something that especially children of immigrants, people that have not had stability historically, we look for that. And when our floor is unstable and shaky, we don't even have the capacity, the brain capacity to be creative, to like pitch yourself, to go find clients because you're constantly seeking for that stability. So it's really important to make sure that whatever it is, your stability is taken care of. And for some people, stability could mean like 3 months worth of savings. For some other people might mean like a year worth of savings, like it depends. And so I think it's important to like call out that little detail.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. And again, I think because I was in tech, there's also um, so much access to resources that I still have, and access to knowledge, like things that I learned within tech. I'm like, oh, I know that there's something out there for this. Let me go Google it and find it. I know that there has to be a resource for this. O sea, no estoy sort of in the dark about things. And though there are things that I'm having to do on my own, and it's kind of difficult to try to figure out, no one in my family has ever started a business or like had this kind of stuff. I know that there are people out there that do, right? And I know where to find it. So entrepreneurship has really been one of those, you have no choice but to ask for help at this
Yeah,
point.
for sure. especially as eldest daughters, that's hard because you're so used to doing it.
Mhm, and I'm like, "There has to be a way." I'm like, "There has
Right.
to be a way where I can do it by myself." Like, I don't need to bother. That's my thing. I don't wanna bother
Bother.
people.
Yes.
I had my friend the other day, she's like, "Yvonne, why didn't you ask me about this when I already did it?" And I'm like, "Well, I didn't wanna bother you. I didn't know what you had going on that day." She's like, "Yeah, well, you're not gonna know what I have going on that day if you don't ask me." I'm like, "Okay, you're right." She's like, "Allow me to say no, or allow me to set a boundary if I'm not able to help you in the moment," right? And I'm like, "Okay, ya, quedé regañada. Thank you."
Aprendí, aprendí. Okay, so how did you make it to San Diego?
I prior to 2020, I graduated college in 2017, had my job for like 2 years. I was like, "I need to move. I wanna move somewhere." I always thought I would move to, like, somewhere in SoCal, LA, because while I was in college, had friends over there, so I would go back there all the time. And, o sea, no pasó because of 2020, and
Right.
then a couple years later, I was like, "Okay, it's time." Estoy en la casa, está mi mamá, su esposo, my sister, my brother, 2 dogs, 3 birds, right? It's a lot. And I was like, "I need to get out of here." Um, because I like quiet. I like a lot of quiet. So anyway, I was like, San Diego." Randomly, one day it came to my mind, and I had been to San Diego once before, but I was like, "Let me look at San Diego." I started looking at some of the apartment complexes, appliqué, and within 2 weeks, I got like oh, okay, cool, you're coming, and I didn't tell my mom until a week before.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
y es que, ¿sabes? No sé de dónde viene esto, but I do these things sometimes because I care so much about what my close family members, think, and I know this about myself, and so I was like, "If they start putting doubt in my mind, I'm
Yeah.
just not gonna do it," right?
Yeah.
So, I told her a week before I started packing my stuff, I came to San Diego with literally just my clothes and, like, toiletries because I bought all my furniture when I got to San Diego. Um, but it was just I wanted a change of scenery, and I wanted to move, but I'm also a Cali girl through and through,
Mhm.
like, I had to stay in California. I love the beaches. Like, I am at the beach any chance that I get, and I know that's so cliche, like, everybody says that about San Diego, but, um and I just think I needed somewhere that was farther away from home, but not necessarily too far.
Mhm. A flight, but not a drive away.
Yeah, yeah, and so I've been in San Diego for a little bit over 2 years now. Um, so it's been awesome, and I think my mom now is happy that I'm here because she gets to come and visit and, like, it's like a mini
Nice.
vacation.
That's awesome. Should have done this interview in person next time.
Yes.
But we're both traveling this
Yeah.
week, so
I know.
next
You're in
time.
Denver, I'm in Tucson.
Yeah. What's next for you?
I am continuing to build out my public speaking consulting business, and I think, one of the things that I'm really working on is starting a brand for it, Latina Presente, because I wanna detach it from me. Like, I still provide my services, like, public speaking consulting, workshops, trainings, but I think that I've realized now that I've had time to actually sit with it and really internalize my vision and mission for it, it's so much more about, um, sure, maybe I have some of the knowledge or experience that you want to pick my brain about, but, like, I want it to be more community based, and I want to allow for myself to be also a little bit more creative in what I produce for Latina Presente. So, um, at the center of it all really is community practice, right? So with public speaking, you don't get better at it if you don't practice it. And so often the barrier between actually doing it is that practice piece. And so I want to continue to create spaces and access points where people can just practice and give each other good feedback based on a loving foundation for one another, but also like wanting to see someone improve, knowing what they want in their public speaking. Because some people don't want to go on stages and get paid to speak on a stage or a panel. They simply want to be able to present their ideas in a corporate room, right? So, um, Latina Presente is that hub, is that community that I want to, expand and continue expanding, right? Chats with Yvonne is always chats with Yvonne, right? Like I'm gonna stay talking about public speaking because I'm a nerd about it. But Latina Presente is this new sort of leg to it that I'm building.
How did you know you wanted to be a public speaker? Especially as an introvert. Now, we can clarify what the difference is because I think there's a misconception, but go
See,
on.
it's all about energy, right? It's where I receive and get energy. I won't say that public speaking always gives me energy, but in the moment it does, right? Like
Mm.
afterwards, I'm like, wow, that was so awesome. Okay, now I need to go chill. It's like a roller coaster, right?
Yes,
While you're
yes.
going up it, you're like, no, I hate this. And then as you're going through it, you're like, I kind of hate this. And then afterwards, you're like, wait, can I do it again? Um, so I think I kind of stumbled upon when I was in elementary school. I used to be the MC for all of our cultural events and our graduations in middle school too. I was in theater, right? Like I've always felt like the stage because at home I wasn't able to be and this is only because I've done all this thinking around it, but I'm like at home, school has always been my escape from what home was, right? It was where I could actually explore and be a kid. And so I've always had a really strong attachment to my education because it felt like that was the one place where, oh, I could just do this.
You're just Yvonne.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and I think my teachers saw something in me and would ask me, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And as nervous as I was, I always say that I kind of probably got into public speaking because I'm a little bit of a people pleaser. Um, and so, like, I'd be like, "Okay, I guess," right? And then I would do it, and I was actually really good at it, and I really liked it. And it felt like when I was on stage, it was those moments where I didn't have to, there was an expectation of me, but it was just this was my job. Let's say, oh, okay, I have to make people feel happy about being here today. I can do that. I enjoy doing that. If people in my regular life would allow me to do that and not think, oh, she's super shy and reserved, then I'd probably be a little bit more like it. Right. And so,
Mm.
really, what my introversion means is that I afterwards just occasionally need some time to just be by myself. You get overstimulated. But so looking back, I started in elementary school, middle school, all throughout high school. And when I started in my tech role, actually, but in high school, my school made us do these exhibitions and presentations to pass to the next grade. So if you didn't complete it, there was a whole rubric to it. It was like an hour-long presentation of all of your work and how it showed that you were a critical thinker and creative and ready for college,
Nice.
right? Yeah, it was a really awesome experience. My presentation happened to be featured on the teaching channel locally in the Bay Area, and from there, that's how I got my first keynote. They said, "Hey, Yvonne, could you speak at this conference about this?" And that's
Out of high school.
Mhm. Yeah.
Nice.
And it continued on through college, and so that's really where my paid public speaking journey began, right? If I think about, oh, my public speaking, because public speaking is being in front of and spoken word, elementary school, it's always kind of been there.
Yeah.
But I really started in high school all throughout college.
And you never stopped.
I never stopped. Yeah. I've always said it's always been my little side hustle.
Yeah.
My side hustle that should have been, and I think you always kind of know this when you are pulled to something because as an introvert too, right? As an introvert and someone that was like, my career's in tech. I am in internal
Mm.
communications. When I was within the company, there were always opportunities that came to me where it's like, hey, Yvonne, do you want to host this? Hey, Yvonne, we need someone to, as part of the internal communications role now, right? It's like you have to lead the company wide meetings. Um, Put the agenda together, work with the execs. Now you have to lead us through everything and be the MC for it. I'm like, okay. So I think pay attention to those things that keep showing up in your life
Yeah.
because sometimes we're so resistant to the things that we should be actually probably doing that would bring us the most joy. And
Mhm.
for so long, I thought, I don't present and when I say present, like I mean me as como mi persona. I'm an introvert, right? And so what does that mean? That means that when I'm in rooms, I'm not bold. I'm not the loudest person in the room. And naturally people think, "Oh, maybe when she can't speak when she goes on stage," right? And so I always felt this I wanted to pull away from public speaking because I was like, it's not what people expect of
Because
me.
the box.
Yeah. I'm like, it's not what people expect of me. It's not what is in what it means to be an introvert. Like I'm contradicting what it means to
Ooh.
be me, right? And so when I finally just said, you know what, this is like I love doing this. I'm really good at it, and I've learned so much about it over time. I've been doing it for many years. It is okay for me to show up and not be incredibly bold, right? And not
Yes.
be, especially in being in tech, as a, there's this whole conversation around like showing up authentically and showing up as you, right? And so for a lot of people, that's like, oh, let me show up more boldly in my bold colors and the bold red lipstick and
And the hoops.
the hoops, right? And there are moments in time where that is me, right? But it's not always me. And I had to be okay with finding, again, right? Go back to the labels. Like,
Mhm.
being like, do I have to live up to that label of the red lipstick and the hoops if that's not me, right? If actually what I prefer is like a little dangly, colorful earring or not colorful, just like a little stud with maybe a brighter shirt, right? Like I had to be okay with showing up the way that I am because that's actually where I think my power has always been as a public speaker. And I've been trying to either dilute it or show up in a larger than life way that just isn't me. And so being able to lean into the public speaker that I actually am has been really awesome. Like you should have seen my first couple of outfits as a keynote speaker. Boring, so boring, you know, so boring. And so I always say this. I'm like in a constant state of trying to find my style, like fashion style again, because for so long you dilute it. Y luego de repente in tech, no offense, right? Pero nadie se arregla. So then you're
Claro.
like, you're like, okay,
You're blending in.
se te olvida que te gusta arreglarte.
Mhm. Ooh. So, for those who might be like, "Oh, this sounds cool. Maybe I wanna become a public speaker." What would be, like, 3 things that you would recommend?
I know this is hard. Maybe not as hard for my introverts, but again, when I say my introverts, I mean like we just have to prepare a little bit more mentally. It doesn't mean that we can't do it. It just means we just need a little bit more time before and after the interaction. But one of the major things, especially right, because the way that my journey happened was very unique. It was already part of my high school curriculum, and then it was almost like word of mouth.
Yeah.
So the equivalent of that to me when you haven't started anything is the networking, but more, I would say, I'd like to call it more like community building, like show up to things, not because you expect to be, oh, I'm going to be a public speaker if I come to this, but more so just to build connections. Because if you share with someone something that you're really passionate about or that you're an expert at, or just in conversation, they might be the person that has, oh my gosh, I have an event coming up. I'd love to have you as a speaker. Or, oye, I have a podcast. Come on as a speaker. Because a lot of the first one happened because I knew somebody, right? Like, and they
Mhm.
knew me. The second keynote that happened was because there was someone in the audience that was then hosting their own conference in their own state. And they're like, hey, Yvonne, would you be interested in coming out there? And I was like, oh, yeah, cool. And same with the other ones, right? So that first initial one, it really is finding a community that you actually want to be a part of so that you can speak at these. Public speaking can often feel like it asks you to be something that you're not. And so if you're in those rooms where you feel like you have to be something that you're not, then the public speaking is not going to feel great. You're not
Yeah.
going to feel like your public speaking is coming from a place of sharing and knowledge and community building. So that I think is really an important foundation. It's building community first. The second thing is telling people that you're available to speak, right? Like you don't have to necessarily to speak. You have to have an experience, right? Some either a story to share or knowledge that you've acquired over time. It doesn't mean like just because you haven't spoken never, maybe you haven't spoken before. It doesn't mean that you don't have an entire resume of things that you already have done that you're an expert at, right? And so telling people that you're available to speak and making it a practice to just put it out there in the world. And then I would say the third thing is, well, it's kind of the same thing, but like pitching yourself, applying to the conferences, even when you don't think that you'll get it or whatever
Yes.
it is. Continue applying and knowing when you're okay with not getting paid. right? When you're doing it solely because you want the experience and knowing when, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, I should be getting paid for this," right? And if you don't have the resources to access, like, how do I know if I should be getting paid for this? Go back to that community that you're building and ask them about it. And then the other thing is get really comfortable with your voice, right? Like, just talk to yourself. Like, write it down and then read out loud. That's something that I do. And I'm talking to my introverts right here, right? Like, if you're an extrovert, you're gonna go out there and you're gonna use your maybe talk to many different people. You'll get used to the sound of your voice. As an introvert, do it internally, right? Some ways that you can do it at home: read out loud, talk to yourself over the cup of cafecito, right? Like,
Yes.
go randomly look up public speaking prompts, and practice that.
Yeah. I would say for the extroverts, because I am an extrovert, what extroverts need to work on is to consolidate, to make the stories concise. I mean, clearly, here we are going up over time. And so so the extroverts is, I mean, it is a different thing
Mhm.
because like for me, I always have to like I tell this like 15-page story and then I have to make that 2 paragraphs. And so it's editing down, I think. And I mean, of course, it's not like a hard like whatever rule.
No, labels again.
Yeah, labels. But I think there's like there could be like the 2 types, like maybe read it out loud, practice like speaking it more. And for the ones that have no problem with that, make sure that it's concise and to the point.
Yeah, yeah, and know that you don't have to include everything into one thing. You have multiple opportunities to speak, and so just because you didn't mention it that one time, it doesn't mean that you can't mention it another time. But think about you as an audience member. You we There's only so much information that we can intake, and
Mhm.
so think about, what do I actually want them to leave with? And that thing is the thing that I'm gonna repeat the most so that they actually internalize it.
I love that. Well, Yvonne, thank you so much for coming to Cafe con Pam. Tell us all the places and spaces where we can find you.
Chats with Yvonne across platforms, and Latina Presente as well across platforms. And yeah, on all socials as well. I have my podcast as well, Chats with Yvonne podcast, talk about public speaking and a couple other things. I have a speaker spotlight series. So if you're someone that would like to practice their public speaking, you do a TED Talk like speech for like 3 5 minutes, and then we go into an interview and conversation.
I was part of one.
Yeah.
That's exciting. I don't know. Ooh. Do we want to send listeners? I guess.
Yes,
Which
listen to it.
something funny is that I have zero problem talking in front of people. Like put me in a room. Like my biggest audience has been 5,000 people. Zero problem. No nerves. Put me in a podcast, and I'm like, ooh, I don't know.
It's the extrovert in you.
I think so.
Put me in a podcast, I'm like, "Yeah, I could talk all day. Just one other person."
Right. Oh my gosh, that's so uncomfortable to me. That's so true. I think it's the extrovert in me. And I'm so weird also with like somebody scheduled with networking with like coffee chats, like get to know each other. I'm just so awkward. Like that's just like I would rather not have coffee chats because
I
I'm
honestly, those ones, I sometimes am a little, get nervous about them, but maybe it's the, like, part of me that is sometimes socially anxious, or I've
mm,
worked in tech so much that all of my roles actually in my career have been what you would consider to be better fitting for extroverts. Um, I always have icebreakers in my mind. I always have things to talk about because I've always had to keep those on deck just in case I needed them.
makes sense. I probably need to do that because ugh, like this last coffee chat that I had with someone, I was like, I'm so done. I don't want to talk about myself.
Yeah.
Like she was like, tell me a story. And I'm like, can you ask me about a story? Like,
It's the
so
difference between tell me a story versus tell me about the
yeah.
last time that you remember hurting yourself.
Yeah. Like my worst question that people like, this is a pet peeve, and I'm sorry if you've asked me before. I'll do my best is tell me about you. What do you want to know? I'm a dog
Yeah.
mom.
Yeah.
That's about me.
Yeah. Yeah, you're like, "Is that relevant to what we're talking
Right.
about?"
Like that's not a good question,
Yeah.
listeners.
Yeah. And you're really good at asking questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Probably because I'm so aware of the questions I don't want people to ask me. I don't know. Okay, so last few questions. We're so over time. Do you have a remedio?
Remedio, yes, dance. I like to dance, whether it's in my room or actually go out to dance. I love dancing.
Well, let's go dancing in San Diego. I used to dance salsa.
That's awesome. I wouldn't say I'm great at it. I just like doing it.
As long as you move. As long as you move. Body movement. Do you have a quote or mantra that you live by?
Yes, and I think it's top of mind because of I just listened to Rake's new album, but no hay peor intento que el que no se hace.
Me encantó. Y do you have a productivity tip, trick, or tool that you want to share?
I think most of us will say like, "Oh, rest, journal," and I think it's also because I'm a public speaker now and I know the power of just speaking out loud, but making sense of our emotions or making sense of what we actually need sometimes requires us to say it out loud, and
Mm,
having someone if you are the type of I think you can do it on your own, but having someone to actually listen to it, I think is important, so I'll take anybody that'll listen. I'm like, "Hey, I have this going on." I think it really helps me make sense of stuff and almost, like, internalize my feelings, but then not keep them bottled up and get them
yes.
out there and then work with whatever I can.
Yeah. I call that verbal processing. It's really powerful, actually,
Yeah.
because for not like people that are like inherently verbal processors, they need that. I need
Mhm.
that. So actually, I have a call with a friend every other Friday where we give each other 30 minutes to just like talk. And
Mm,
it's really powerful.
that's awesome. I love that. Maybe that I've probably been doing that and didn't even realize it, but, having the weeklies.
Yes. Helps. Helps.
Yeah.
Okay. And the very, very last question, how do you or have you been practicing restorative pauses?
Lately, it's been more hard to do, but just like but and I'll say this because, right now I'm traveling, and I've been traveling almost for the last 2 weeks. I was in the Bay, and then I came here, and so it's gonna sound so, so cheesy, but it really is running. Like,
Mm.
Me estaba sintiendo the last couple of days, like, really anxious and, like, I almost wanted to cry because I was so annoyed. You can't express yourself,
Yeah.
when you're not in your own and you're surrounded by with others, so I was like, "Oh, I need to go on a run," and running always calms me down for a minute, and I
Nice.
know it's not technically really pausing, like, I'm in movement, I guess, but
Mhm. But it pauses your mind, maybe.
yeah, like, I cannot do the bath and body like a bath bomb. It just my mind continues. It's not a pause for me. It's not peaceful for me at all. I don't know what that says about me, but it's not peaceful for me at all. And like a candle, no, I need to be doing something. I've realized that my restorative pause is actually doing something, like
Mm.
with my hands or physically, because that physical action, movement takes away from all the stuff that I may be feeling or thinking about that's consuming my mind, so a run always does the trick for me.
For sure. I mean, it makes sense because for me as an EFT practitioner, we look at energy. And so, like, as you run and you move your body, it's a form of releasing energy.
Mhm.
It's almost like you're pushing your body to sweat and release whatever it is that you're dealing with.
Yeah, it's been such a powerful tool for me. Like, when I started running, it was like, "Hmm, when did I do
This
this?"
it.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, Yvonne, thank you so much for coming to Cafe Con Pam. This was awesome. Thank you for your time. We went over, but I appreciate you staying.
I'm a rambler too.
It's all good. This was awesome. Pues that was my conversation with Yvonne. I hope you enjoyed it. It was really fun for me to explore Yvonne's life, her career, and even seeing the possibilities for her as a public speaker and her passion for sharing that with all of us. It's really cool also to see and to hear the stories of people that choose to follow their passion just like Yvonne decided to do. And I hope this episode leaves you inspired and perhaps it gave you like maybe planted a seed for you to start even exploring a little bit of what is your passion? What is it? What does it look like? What do I want to do? How do you want to leave the world a better place? Let us know. I would love for you to screenshot and tag us and let us know what resonates from this episode because I feel like we talked about so much. Y bueno, como siempre, let's stay connected at Café con Pan Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, at Café con Pan Pod on TikTok. One day I'll post there. We're there. cafeconpan.com. If you want to check out all the things that we do, besides podcasts, we also have the pour over, which are written articles about people. And to give a little background on the pour over, the reason why we started doing pour overs is because we had so many potential guests, so many stories that we wanted to share, and we only have space for doing one episode per week. And so we started doing written articles. And I feel like Café con Pam has evolved into more of a media publication, which is really, really cool. And so, besides listening to episodes like this one or watching us on YouTube, you can check it out. Check out our website, cafeconpan.com, and explore the other types of stories that we have. We have so many, like so many. We have 362 episodes. This is episode 362. And we also have, I don't know how many pour overs at this point, but there's a lot. And if you are watching us on YouTube or if you're not on YouTube, we have YouTube exclusive episodes. So in YouTube, we are there at Café con Pam or just search Café con Pam. Make sure you subscribe on all of the platforms because it's important. It helps us with the visibility of the show. The more you people subscribe, the more the show seems, I guess I want to say, popular for the algorithms that recommend shows to other people. And so it's really helpful when you choose to follow and subscribe. And of course, very helpful if you leave some stars. Drop some stars if you're listening to the show, or drop a comment if you're watching us on YouTube. Y bueno, listeners, thank you so, so much for being here today. Como siempre, stay shining.
Sabrosura pa' ti que